Hello, so welcome everyone. We're very happy to host this panel now on breaking barriers, blockchain as catalyst for financial inclusion. In this session, we will explore how blockchain technology can support financial inclusion and open new economic opportunities. We will look at real examples from cross-border payments, remittances to decentralized finance, and learn how different actors like development organizations, financial institutions, and blockchain innovators are working together to make finance more accessible for all. So before we dive in, let me briefly introduce myself and our amazing panel. My name is Ronald Steyer. I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Positive Blockchain, and I'm working in the innovation and digitalization at KfW, which is a German development bank. I'm thrilled to be joined today by four fantastic experts. So starting with Annie Popiashvili, she's portfolio co-lead at the World Bank Group, and she's bringing experience in the development finance and innovation. Then there is Anna Whitson-Diaz, Senior Partnerships Manager for AID at the Stellar Development Foundation. She's working at the intersection of blockchain and humanitarian assistance. Then there is Alex Massa, Sustainability Lead at the Cardano Foundation, where he focuses on using blockchain for social impact and long-term sustainability. And we have Robert Pasico, Team Leader at UNDP's Alternative Finance Lab, who's been pioneering new approaches to development finance through emerging technologies. And of course, we'd love to hear from you, the audience. Feel free to drop questions or thoughts in the chat, and we'll do the best to bring them into discussions as we go. So I think we are really prepared for an exciting and insightful conversation. So let's get started with a question to all of you, maybe starting with Annie. So from your perspective, what makes blockchain such a powerful tool for advancing financial inclusion? And what's the one example from your work that illustrates that potential?
Thank you, Ronald, and hello, everyone. Firstly, it's my pleasure to be here among the panelists, and thank you so much for having me here today. Interesting question to get started with, right? So there is a lot of potential that we have seen leveraging blockchain technology to kind of advance the financial inclusion, and we've been exploring also at the bank different POCs, as well as conducting different experimentation to better understand the benefits of this technology as compared to, for example, traditional payment rails, and how it can support the financial inclusion. There are multiple use cases, right, that we can discuss where we can benefit from the blockchain technology and where the potential can be seen. For example, we have to mention the cross-border payments and affordability of remittances. There is a huge potential to leverage it, and we have seen blockchain leverage in different tokenized digital assets, for example, CBDC, central bank digital currencies, or even stablecoin delivery of funds when it comes to delivery of aid, or even on a corporate side, delivery of funds to the staff in the kind of emergency scenarios and affected situations, right? So in these scenarios, blockchain technology absolutely has a potential, but we also have to kind of understand the caveats that are associated with it. When we kind of talk about the reduction in costs, I think it really depends on the jurisdictions that we are talking about and what is the kind of the technology that is leverage in a full circle of the payment transaction. So that is kind of one aspect that we have to better understand, as well as accessibility factor when it comes to the financial inclusion, how different underdeserved communities have access to it. In some of the rural areas, it may be challenging to even off-ramp some of the funds that are being delivered using this technology. So while we're discussing the benefits, obviously it's important to mention the transparency. It's important to mention the immutability of transactions. and other aspects, but we also have to keep in mind some of the caveats that are associated with it. At the bank, it's quite interesting. We have been looking at the blockchain technology from different lenses, both on a corporate side as well as supporting different engagements. So on the corporate side, it's interesting that very recently our World Bank Finance and Accounting team piloted a solution called Funds Chain, which is a blockchain traceability project for the loans disbursement. So think about it that the projects that the World Bank finances will be traced on the blockchain technology, and everyone can view how the funds are being dispersed. So it's quite an interesting use case, one of those. We have been also exploring different central bank digital currency related experimentations to better understand the power of this digital assets and how can it be leveraged, as well as the delivery of aid or enhancing, for example, financial inclusion using the stable coins. So these are some of the use cases, as well as, in my view, what is the benefit of the blockchain technology.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Already a lot of interesting things. We might follow up in a few minutes. But Anna, so you're working for Stella, which has quite a focus on payments, I think. So what's your perspective? So and what's the use case which illustrates the potential the best?
Yeah, so just in case people aren't familiar, I work at the Stellar Development Foundation. And so we are a blockchain foundation. We're a nonprofit, so we're really focused on financial inclusion. We've been around for about 10 years. So our blockchain is really optimized for digital payments. This is kind of a perfect question for us. Um, so I think really at the heart of it, where you see the benefit of blockchain in this space is really that it enables fast, low cost, accessible financial services. And so this means that we can reach places and people that are traditionally excluded, right, from the financial ecosystem. So, you know, people that are left behind, people in conflict zones, maybe they live in a remote place, maybe they live in a place where the banking system has broken down, or maybe they just can't access traditional financial services and products that we kind of living in. I live in New York, for instance, so a lot of people in New York would never bat an eye. About being able to access a bank account or access investment products or access loans and all of these things, right? So this all becomes possible when you use blockchain based financial services. So if you Google Stellar Development Foundation, you've probably seen that we do a lot of work with UNHCR. They're one of our flagship partners. And so we talk about this a lot. This is a really interesting use case where we're using the blockchain to actually make direct payments to people in situations of displacement within Ukraine. So we've done about $5 million with UNHCR in Ukraine, which is, I think, a super interesting use case. It just demonstrates that people are receiving these blockchain-based payments directly to their phone. They're able to get it back out into local currency quickly, efficiently, and UNHCR is saving quite a bit. They've saved actually using this technology in Ukraine, not just our technology, but blockchain technology overall, about 30 million USD. So there's benefits for the receiver on the financial inclusion side. It really gives them access to things that they might not have access to in the traditional system. But on the donor side as well, you see a lot of cost savings, right? You see cost savings in terms of time, in terms of cross-border transfer fees, quite substantially, right? So we can get the fees down to less than 1% in many cases, 1 to 2% in a lot of cases, which when you look at regular transfer fees, this is like kind of a game changer, right? And it's also very transparent. So the donors are very interested in using blockchain technology because of the transparency aspect as well. So I think this is an interesting use case you hear about a lot, but I think maybe even more interesting is some of the work that we're doing with GIZ actually in Syria. So we've been using the exact same technology, the digital cash disbursement technology that we have at Stellar, which I could go into a lot of detail about later. But using that exact same technology to pay healthcare workers in northern Syria. And so this is solving a huge problem for GIZ where it was incredibly slow, costly, unsafe to get money into Syria, which is a region that's been obviously plagued by conflict and a lot of volatility. And so hospital workers just weren't getting paid, or they were getting paid on a 3 to 4 month time lag. In a lot of cases, and they were being charged high fees at cash out, all of these things, right? So we're actually using the same technology to enable payroll, to kind of include people in this market that might not have been before, right? So it's a lot easier for them to get paid. It's a lot easier for them to then contribute back to their local ecosystem. So I think I'll stop there because there's a lot more that we could say about this, but just to get us started thinking about how the digital payments and the financial inclusion could do work in this space.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned very fragile situations like the Ukraine and Syria. That I think is something we can also follow up. So, is the potential there, or is it more in more stable environments? But first, Alex, you are part with Cardano of a really huge and very broad and diverse community. So, as you focus on the sustainability part, so what's your impression, and from your work, what's a good example for the potential?
Thanks, Ronald. And so for me, I think financial inclusion and blockchain relates to creating moments of agency for an economic opportunity for people through some of these systems. Now, Cardano is a very general purpose blockchain. And so picking a favorite project is kind of a difficult one. We've seen things that relate to the stablecoin kind of use case and payments. We've seen some that relate to supply chain. But I also kind of believe that these systems kind of intermingle. So one that I think is particularly interesting is when blockchain technology allows businesses or solutions to bring trust into either fragmented or let's say high costs markets for traditional financial institutions. And one of these that is usually looked at is everything in the informal sector. And I want to zoom in particularly on, let's say, subsistence farming generally, where there are questions around land ownership, land value, and then all the supply chains, the value chains between the smallholder farmer and eventually the end consumer. I think one particular use case that I find fascinating is when you connect satellite imagery and other forms of data, environmental data around subsistence farming, and empower the farmer to actually have access to additional agri-services, so banking, reinsurance, and everything that relates to their own field at a scalable level. So this is one of the use cases that I thought was quite interesting, is essentially using blockchain technology to provide trust on some data that financial institutions would not typically trust at scale, and then enable users at scale to participate in the more traditional financial system. So this is one of the use cases, but happy to go into more detail later.
Yeah, thanks a lot for these. So Robert, you are with UNDP, so that's one of the largest implementer of development work worldwide. So I think there are a lot of use cases, at least potential use cases, but picking one from the financial inclusion side, what would that be, and why is blockchain in this case so powerful and leverage the technology so well?
Thank you, Ronald, for the question. I found the whole story like very simple, actually. I remember some 12, 13 years ago, I was in Istanbul with a number of colleagues, and we were discussing about WhatsApp and new opportunities coming from WhatsApp. And for me, it was clear, like, okay, WhatsApp is coming. Why would anybody in the world with the right mind ever pay for roaming again? But I remember talking with colleagues. They were like, no, it will never happen. What do you mean it will never happen? Technology is there. It will never happen. Telecom operators, they will never allow this. Like, who is asking them, will they allow this or not, right? So, and I remember, and I remember like the full room of people there, and like nobody believed that this is going to change everything. So in 2016, 17, we started with the first remittances digital payment project with ATech in Serbia. It was very small, 30 families. This is where we learned how things work. Like we were transferring money from Serbian diaspora in Germany to one town in Serbia. And then we did several more things. And one of the colleagues with whom we work actually in Tajikistan is now in Afghanistan. And he was working with a local company there, HesaPay. Last year they transferred $1 million to women in rural areas. So that's like otherwise the only other way would be to put this money in a helicopter, to put this money in a jeep, like put the army around you and go and distribute this money. So once again, who with the right mind would do this if you have a better way how to do it? And blockchain is allowing us to do this. So I don't think that this, I believe that now we are at the moment where this is possible, where we are doing this, and it's time that we scale up. So for example, we have a partnership with Stellar now, and we are doing research in 18 countries, in 18 different jurisdictions, to find out what are the specific banks, their apps, mobile payments, culture, and what are the projects, what are the payment options that we can put on digital payments surrounded by blockchain. We already collected a huge amount of research and understanding. I would say ask us in few months when we have the full picture, when we pick up several pilots. And as I say, I think it's time we cut out the middleman and we start working with digital payments as it should be. Digital and fast, transparent, cheap. Technology is there to provide. It's just, how do we make sure that this works?
Yeah, very interesting. I think now after we heard about Ukraine and now we also heard about Afghanistan, so all these more fragile settings. So I think for this to work for the people there, how do you address this last mile challenge? So how do you address this, that the challenge that people need to go from crypto or token to some sort of cash, or at least some sort of mechanism that then brings them to their food, medical supplies, and so on. So how is this done in this different, most probably also differently in different spaces? But what's your general take on this? How to get to the people?
Maybe I can
Robert, please.
start. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
maybe
I was going to say,
or
yeah, I
Anna.
know.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I have a lot to say on this. I'll try to be brief, but I think unless I make this a commercial for Stellar, but I think at Stellar, one of our kind of key aims is really to ensure, as I said, is financial inclusion, right? So everyone needs to be able to have access to the system. When you're using digital assets, like the reality is that not everyone in the world is prepared to use digital assets at, say, a point of sale, right? We're not there yet. And we recognize that as Stellar, especially when we're looking at kind of the last mile opportunities, emerging economies, fragile contexts, all of this, right? So it really necessitates locally appropriate off ramps. So this is very specific to the context of the country you're working in. But one thing that we've been able to do at Stellar is partner with many different types of organizations that act as off ramps for us. So if you Google Stellar, you might see that we have a large partnership with MoneyGram International. They have a crypto product actually called MoneyGram Access, where you can walk into any MoneyGram worldwide and cash out your USDC into local currency. And so this is something that's right now only on Stellar. But this is really a game changer because we've, across the world, you see that people might not have a bank in their town, but often they have a MoneyGram point, right? And so this allows really a lot of access to off-ramping digital assets that people didn't have before, right? So you can actually transact in crypto, but get it out, right? And actually use it in the real world, which is, I think where we at Stellar kind of think we need to be right now, especially serving the kind of aid and humanitarian portfolio, which is kind of where I live, obviously in the foundation. So I think this is a key thing, right? Is knowing that for a lot of people, financial inclusion means that they need to get the crypto back into fiat. They need to get it back into local currency, regular money. And so what we have at Stellar is a network of locally appropriate off-ramps, whether that's MoneyGram, whether that's other local physical cash out points. For instance, in Mexico, if you know Mexico at all, we have OXXO. This is just an example, but it's like a 7-Eleven, right? They're on every corner and you can walk in there and get your digital currency into pesos. So we need to have it be context appropriate and needs to be relevant for the country in which you're operating, whether that's, an OXXO in Mexico or mobile money in Eastern Africa. And it really depends on the kind of setup you have, what you're able to do in terms of off ramping. But this is really key at this moment in time until we kind of take the next step with blockchain to enable people to actually use it to pay for goods and services, especially in remote, fragile, underserved areas. We need to be able to off ramp it back into fiat. So yeah.
Thanks a lot. I think so. You mentioned a lot of cases that where we can basically already show that these things are working. So, Ani, you are working for the World Bank. So, I know that from discussions in these spaces, this idea of scaling up things is quite a popular understanding. So there are use cases on the ground. So from your perspective and your experience, what are enablers or also basically or barriers you see for scaling such successful solutions in a larger scale for financial inclusion programs?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I think so firstly, just to kind of mention that a lot of our work is focused on kind of experimentation and kind of understanding the benefit of this technology. But to rely on some of the, excuse me, to rely on some of the research and the work that we have done, right? If we are talking about some of the rural areas or some of the areas where even the accessibility is quite challenging, the scaling can be an issue there, right? So there are multiple studies which I can refer to. For example, even MIT's financial inclusion study that is focused on understanding specifically from the lenses of CBDC how it can be used or is it enhances or really divides the financial inclusion or provides more caveats. So it discusses different characteristics when it comes to leveraging this technology, and one of them is access, right? So access needs to be guaranteed to the beneficiaries in order for them to leverage this technology and the assets that are transitioning on it. So, and it can certainly be one of the ways where the scalability can be assured. Another factor can be obviously the understanding of what is the regulatory and policy landscape in the jurisdictions. It's kind of the ongoing effort, and we see kind of different emergencies in different areas. For example, in emerging markets, we can see maybe more advancements than in developing areas. But this also obviously affects the scalability factor of such technology. So in a nutshell, I think when it comes to scalability, I have to also rely on the technology itself because the blockchain itself has a decentralized nature, and there is a lot of studies on that as well. How the decentralization affects the scalability of the blockchain technology. I think it's important that if we are truly making it open, permissionless, certainly the topic of scalability, it will be important. How can we scale it up when different parties come together to agree on the state of the blockchain? So it's a big discussion, right? Or who are those parties that are also validating the state of it. So there are multiple kind of points when we can discuss the scalability factor when it comes, in my opinion. So
if we look at this, and we heard it, I think from basically all of you, that you have to look for the specific circumstances also on a country level, because obviously the regulatory setting and the markets for last mile services are very different in different countries. So do you see a specific pattern that evolves? We already heard that a lot of examples come from the more fragile situations, but do you see any specific pattern with regard to the potential to use these technologies for financial inclusion in countries or regions? So maybe Robert, if you would like to start,
Sure.
because I expect you have a quite broad
Yes.
portfolio in
So
this regard.
I would say, what we can see is some patterns like remittances payment, right? So like in some countries you have remittances payment being 50, 60, even 70, 80% of the GDP, of the money which is flowing in the country. So if you do this with a traditional banking system, banking model, then the costs for this are super high. So the question is, how do we find, because and then all these countries have either some apps, either some mobile payment options, either some other like Hawala system or some other way which is also working, so that not all the people use the traditional let's say Western Union or banking system where you lose 10 to 15% of money, because it's really too much. It's what we're trying to find out now, what are these, like how to make these things more accessible. And if you drive, for example, in London in tube or in Paris, you will find many different advertisements for different apps. For example, how to bring money to your relatives somewhere in Africa, right? And Africa is like what we can see, like a huge readiness for innovation and acceptance of new approaches. The question is, do we need to reinvent the wheel, or how do we actually find the ecosystem which is there and just use some traditional practices such as remittances for people who, I don't know, work in London or in Paris? They, of course, they want to send money back home, whether this is Syria, whether this is Niger, and how do we make it, how do we make it working for them? At the end of the day, I believe that it has to be seamless, because the technology is successful if it's invisible, this type of technology. So at the end of the day, I believe that we have to come to the moment where you can off-ramp somehow, somewhere, either using ATM machines, if some are there, or something else. But if we make it right, then technology will provide answers, and it will just work, without any researchers, without any development organizations. So this is our goal. Our goal is that we have nothing else to do regarding digital payments, because technology is delivering what it is promising, right? And I believe that if we are able to put ourselves out of work on this, all the development agencies and banks, then we can say, well, we really did something. Now we can solve some other problems, and let's not overestimate or overthink or overdo something which is just like a new way of thinking.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things I think making this invisible or embedded in a way that people can just easily use it is the one thing, but I think for making this also work for people, they need some sort of trust in what the technology, how this technology works. So maybe for Alex, I think there is some need for at least have a basic understanding what happens in the technology. So from your work at the Cardano Foundation, what is the role of supporting local capacity building in those markets, so that there is a better understanding and maybe even the potential to include a local, maybe even innovators into the process?
So that's a really good question, Ronald. I think on one hand, teaching people about blockchain is like teaching people about the internet, and figuring out exactly what they need to know about blockchain is always a tough challenge. One of the things that we do have as the foundation is a very strong focus on education, both on the academy side, where we have an open sourced solution that anybody can kind of take a look at and figure out the basics from a business or technology perspective regarding Cardano. And then what we do as a foundation ourselves is also educate more institutional stakeholders like UN agencies, governments, regulators, etc. So there's different ways of providing, let's say, technical knowledge about the blockchain and how it could be used and what are the risks involved. Now, at the same time, Cardano is a fairly decentralized blockchain that has its own decentralized treasury, which is separate from the Cardano Foundation's treasury. And that also enables the localization of education and innovation and funds some of this. So, for example, if you look at the context of this particular conference that we're in, experts in sustainability in blockchain for good have received funding from the Cardano Treasury in order to put on an educational event for people in this sector. So in that sense, there's a lot of need to empower local builders, local innovators on specific topics that are relevant to them. And I want to maybe kind of take a detour on the conversation that we've been having so far, where we've been speaking about financial inclusion as it relates to payments, particularly in the humanitarian context. And I think, one of the key values that I've seen with Cardano is it looking at financial inclusion from an international development context, from an economic growth context, and access to financial services beyond purely moving value around, which is incredibly important and is actually an underserved market, but also looking at how we can use this blockchain technology to create value that was very difficult to have before. And I go back to the case that I was speaking about in my intro, where you talk about subsistence farmers who are approximately over 500 million people worldwide, which is a significant portion of our global population, and they typically work on less than 2 hectares of land. And in order to generate financial inclusion on small amounts, a small asset of land is typically challenging. Generating financial data related to it that would enable this is typically challenging. But with blockchain technology, what you can typically do is tokenize some of that data. And once you tokenize a small amount of land and aggregate that, you can potentially offer this as a financial product or instrument that traditional financial institutions could provide services against, like insurance or lending, which is typically really important for small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly subsistence ones, when it comes to trade finance and operational finance between crops and getting their crops to the final seller. In essence, the people using the blockchain don't really need to know too much about it, in the same way that they need to be able to trust the service providers that exist. And then it is up to the regulator to ensure that their consumers and their companies in the country are protected from potentially dangerous practices that may be done on a blockchain layer 1, in the same way that they would protect their markets against internet service providers or other types of digital service providers that may not be acting in the best interests of their constituencies. So here the regulator plays an incredibly important role. Blockchain foundations, as well as local legislators and regulators, play an equally important role in maintaining this kind of conversation to ensure that people that are potentially in line to receive the most value from blockchain technology are not on the side of being extracted from as we've often seen when it comes to digital technologies and digital solutionism, particularly from the global north onto the global south.
Yeah, I think that touched on a lot of very interesting elements, like making financial and maybe also insurance products possible in settings where you might have not the chance to do this and not at that scale because of the very high transaction costs in traditional systems. So yeah, unfortunately, we have a look at the time already, and I checked the questions which came in. There are a lot of very interesting ones, and I want to just read out one of the questions. There is the audience, some member of the audience said a lot of positives shared, but what are the challenges of using? Oh, okay, you see it here. That's the question. Well, it's specifically looking at the more fragile situations, often sensitive in war and conflict context. If it goes in the wrong hands, when not to use it. So maybe Anna, I think you have this specific also experience from the humanitarian field. What's your take on the questions?
Yeah, this is a great question, obviously. So, as I mentioned, we've been using this technology in kind of fragile contexts, so in Ukraine and Syria, et cetera. And this is a question we all often get, right? Can it be hacked? Can it be tampered with, et cetera? Maybe it ends up in the wrong hands, these kind of things. But the way that the blockchain based digital payments that we use are designed is really with a lot of safeguards in place to ensure that the person that is meant to receive the money, is meant to receive the digital currency directly to their smartphone and to their account, is the only person that can receive it. So this is safeguards in place like PINs with the organization, like different methods of verifying the participant in the program as well. And obviously we work very closely with, say, like a UNHCR or a GIZ to make sure that they're vetting the participants from their side and making sure that these are the people that they want to enroll in the program. That's definitely all sitting with them in terms of vetting the actual participants as well. So there's a lot built into the technology to make sure that it's going to the right person. We haven't seen any cases yet. Not to say we won't in the future, but any cases yet where the funds have been sent to the wrong person or to kind of like nefarious purposes or been hacked. But I think there are other challenges of sending currency and getting money to people in humanitarian situations. And so this can be things like the regulatory environment in the country not being conducive to digital transfers, right? So this could be, say, a country where a disaster has just happened, but actually they have some kind of ban on cryptocurrency or stable coins, et cetera. So in those cases, it's very difficult, obviously, for obvious reasons, for us to work in those cases. We've seen some willingness of national governments to make exceptions, especially in humanitarian cases and emergencies for inflows of humanitarian financing, especially if the money's coming into the country. They're a little bit more willing to make an exception, and especially if it's a kind of dire humanitarian emergency. So I would say this is one thing that we all need to be aware of kind of as a community is that, the regulations are changing all the time, but this is actually kind of the first and most barrier to entry for us to work in a lot of places is the regulatory landscape in place at the time. And then in humanitarian situations, obviously the off-ramps can be affected as well. So the ability to get the money out can also be affected if you, say, have a natural disaster or, even a local conflict, right? And so this is where having redundancy in the off-ramp, so having basically the blockchain you use in these scenarios matters because the off ramps come with the blockchain, right? So having a blockchain like Stellar that has a lot of different types of off ramps, whether that's physical locations in person, whether that's if people have a bank account, which they don't need to use these blockchain-based solutions, but if they do, they could potentially, be off-ramping to a bank account. So having a lot of different ways people can also get the money out helps us to hedge against some of these challenges we see in a humanitarian environment. But I'll stop there. So I'm sure there are other questions.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of things that could be shared in this area. I would like to pick another question, and this goes to Annie. It's specifically on the World Bank. From the World Bank's perspective, the question is, which globally focused funding partners to the bank are showing interest in alternative tech solutions? Do you see the World Bank taking a lead role by insisting on blockchain tech as a common requirements in programs it funds?
It's quite interesting question. I don't think it's a matter of taking a lead on and focusing on one specific technology. When we start different kind of work at the Innovation Office, which actually back in 2017 was established as the Blockchain Lab, we firstly tried to focus on the problem itself rather than the technology. So blockchain can be one of the technologies that can help us to solve the different challenges that we are trying to tackle. I think we discussed a lot about the remittances in this panel, but we didn't mention, for example, a digital identity, which is a lot of times a challenge when it comes to accessing the different financial services for financial inclusion. And what blockchain technology can do is actually support to enable this blockchain-based identity through verifiable credentials and allow much more access to different underdeserved communities to the financial services, and plus also for them to participate in the formal economy, for example, employment or healthcare, etc. Right? So the focus itself should be on the challenge that you're kind of tackling to understand, rather than on the technology. Similarly, when we, for example, explore different central bank digital currency experimentations or other and digital assets related kind of projects, it not necessarily needs to be a blockchain technology, right? So it can be other, for example, data-based technologies that can solve the challenges that blockchain may not necessarily best fit, at least at this stage. So yeah, I think the focus needs to be understanding what we are trying to solve, and then if the technology is actually helping you to do it or not.
Yeah, I think so. It depends then, and it's not I think that makes complete sense. So
the technology is there, and sorry for stopping. The technology is there, and there are so many different designs that can be explored and understood. And I think this panel kind of emphasized on this collaboration and different parties to come together. I think that plays even bigger role than just focusing on what technology you're really using. So for different parties, local communities, different governments, international organizations, for all of them to come in together and tackle the challenge, I think that's more important than kind of focus on the technology itself.
Yeah. So maybe I take one last question from the chat, which I think is very interesting. So it's the question reads: We are Digital Commons platform cooperative initiative from Indonesia. One reflective thought is about: does the technical complexity of blockchain create new hierarchies of knowledge and power that contradict solidarity principles? So I'm not sure who wants to take this one. So Robert, I think you talked about this.
Yeah. So I would say that's something that we have to be careful about, right? We still live in a world where 1/3 of people don't have access to internet. So the question is, if we are doing some solutions connected with digital and with blockchain, do we create these solutions only for 2/3 who have internet and who are already doing good in the way, or are we creating some solutions also for 1/3 of population which doesn't have access to internet? Also, if we know that 1.2 billion people don't have electricity, again, are we doing for them? So this is the key question that any development should answer, right? So for whom are we creating these solutions? Because technology is neither good or bad, right? With fire, you can burn villages, but with fire, you can feed hungry people and make yourself warm. So it's not about the technology, but it's about the use. How do we use it? And I think that it's excellent that we have people like Commons and Platform Cooperative, from Indonesia, who are thinking about these things. I'm sure you guys are doing the best you can, and let's connect. Let's see what are the things that we can do together, right? Maybe you have a country office, UNDP, somebody in Indonesia. Maybe we can try to do something together. We are using design thinking. We are using ecosystem mapping, sense making, different tools that we have. But then at the end of the day, we will have to see, who benefited from this. Is it the ordinary people, or we just created super complex product that only benefits those who are rich to become even richer, right? And the tendency in the world, as we see, is that we have more and more complex things which are benefiting just less and less people. We have to turn this upside down. That's why I say, yes, we can focus on technology, but it's not the technology. This is the promise that this technology is bringing, cutting off the middleman, finding the solutions that work, that are proven, and then focus on making them scaled up the same way how we are all using, let's say, WhatsApp or Viber for our calls and not paying for roaming anymore, because it's dumb to pay roaming. And in the same way, it will be dumb to pay for all these middlemen. So, for example, one of our colleagues is today in Riyadh at the meeting of the central banks. They are discussing their own standard things. They don't have on agenda these things that we are discussing today, right? For them, this reality doesn't exist. But we know that whether they talk about this or not, we know that in few years they will all have to have, all the central banks will need to have their digital currencies developed or ready or use it somehow. They'll have to incorporate it in their business model. So this is about, we are creating a parallel system with this, and this parallel system, one moment when it becomes strong enough, will just make the other system obsolete.
Thanks a lot, Robert. I think there is so much we should have time to discuss, but I unfortunately have to come to the final round now. We are already the time is already over. So I would like to ask you one question, which maybe in starting with Annie again, and Anna, Alex, and Robert, if you could give one piece of advice to donors, policymakers, innovators looking to harness blockchain for financial inclusion, what would that be? So Annie, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty loaded question. And to say just one thing, it's a bit challenging. But I when I was answering the question in the chat, I mentioned the collaboration, and for everyone kind of to come together and agree on overcoming these challenges that we discussed together. In my opinion, is the one best piece of advice for everyone to come to a consensus in kind of helping these communities and to actually unleash the power of the blockchain technology. So collaboration is just one piece of advice that I can suggest.
Thanks a lot. So Anna, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think my take on this is that we shouldn't be scared of the innovation. I think we went through a period where people were really scared of blockchain and crypto and all these things. And of course, there are nefarious people out there who want to use it for their negative purposes. But I think this really is transformational for the people that we want to serve, from the development, the humanitarian, the financial inclusion angle. And so what I would say to organizations that are at all interested in learning more about this is, I think everyone on this panel is willing to have a conversation with them about the benefits, the drawbacks, and be fully transparent about what it's like to use this technology. But I think you can start small with it. You really can start small. You can do a small pilot. You can better understand the technology. And the technology exists to kind of abstract away the blockchain as well, right? You don't need to be a blockchain expert. I spent most of my career actually at UNDP working on traditional development financing, and have now come over into blockchain. And I can tell you that, the technology is purpose is built in a way to make it accessible for everyone. So I would say that would be my, as Annie said, it's hard to say one thing and then we're short on time, but I would just really, my call to action is just get involved and start learning more, talk to one of us on the panel and start small and see if it works for your organization.
Thanks, Anna. So Alex, what would be your advice?
I would echo what Anna says. Be open to experimentation, to innovation. We've already seen this from UN agencies and their representatives just kind of jumping into the Cardano ecosystem and trying to figure out, okay, what makes sense. And often one of the limiting factors is either kind of technical resources, which in Web3 are actually kind of approachable. There's always somebody that's looking to work with more traditional sector institutions. And then the other side is always the financial resources aspect. And this got covered through the Cardano treasury in general. And so, technical and financial resources are there. The only thing that would be lacking would be, somebody from these traditional donor sectors trying something new in the same way that, for example, the UNDP team that's represented here by Robbie has in the past, as well as UNHCR and a few others. It's really just about taking the first step, testing things out in a very small and targeted manner, and then kind of moving forward and scaling that up if you're seeing, data that points towards a positive output.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I see you nodding, Robert. So is there anything you would add from your perspective?
No, basically, Anna stole my words from my mouth, and just start doing. Just like this project that we had, the first one on digital payment in Serbia, it was 30 families, and then some people were laughing at us. So what they're trying to do? It's only 30 families. So yes, but now this company is making large-scale solutions in the United States using the same technology that was piloted 7-8 years ago with 30 families. So even if you are just a cooperative, even if you are just doing this for one village, it's okay. Like we just need to make a system which works, right? Once we know it works, once we know what are the problems, then we scale it up. So this is how it works. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty and experiment and learn and share your learnings. And we are always also interested to hear from you and to adapt our system to make it like, at the moment, we have many things, many horses running, and we don't know which horse to bet on, right? So we don't need to bet this moment. Let the horses run and let's see, like which technologies are proving and how to adapt our system.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this discussion. I think there were a lot of things we easily could discuss another hour. So thanks for your time. Thanks for your input to this. And yeah, hope we can move this a lot more into the real world of the people and improve their situation. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.